Antarctica. It is a world of superlatives. The coldest, the driest, the highest. A land of breathtaking beauty, unimaginable hostility. Here, the very air can freeze the moisture in your lungs. The wind, the katabatic wind, screams down from the polar plateau, can exceed 200 miles per hour. Nature's power is absolute, humans insignificant. For centuries it remained a mystery, beckoned the bravest of explorers, promised glory, delivered hardship. Imagine a silence so profound it rings, the sound when the wind stops, broken only by glacier carving. The ice is a living entity. It groans, it shifts, it grinds, crushing steel like paper. A monochrome masterpiece of white and blue. 28 men ventured into this realm, driven by a spirit of discovery, a desire to cross the last uncharted continent. They believed they knew the risks, but Antarctica defies preparation. The year was 1914. The world stood on the brink of war, yet in Britain, another ambition captured the public's imagination. Sir Ernest Shackleton announced his plan for the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. His goal? To be the first to cross Antarctica from sea to sea, via the South Pole. A journey of nearly 1,800 miles across the most forbidding terrain on Earth. It wasn't just discovery, it was national pride, a final heroic chapter of the heroic age. Shackleton's call drew an overwhelming response. Over 5,000 men applied for just 27 positions. He famously sought men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. The men he selected were diverse: scientists, sailors, adventurers. Together they formed the crew of the Endurance. The vessel was a marvel of shipbuilding. Named Endurance, motto, "By endurance we conquer," a 300-ton barquentine built of Norwegian fir, oak, greenheart. In August 1914, the Endurance set sail from Plymouth, heading south with 28 men and the hopes of an empire. The Endurance made its way south, reaching the whaling stations of South Georgia in November 1914. The whalers there, men who knew the Antarctic waters better than anyone, issued a stark warning. They reported that it was a particularly bad year for ice in the Weddell Sea. The pack was thicker and extended further north than they had seen in years. They advised Shackleton to delay his journey, to wait for more favorable conditions. However, driven by his ambition and the ticking clock of the expedition schedule, Shackleton made the fateful decision to press on. On December 5, 1914, the Endurance weighed anchor and sailed into the icy embrace of the Weddell Sea. For several weeks, the ship battled its way through the pack ice. Captain Worsley skillfully navigated through a maze of shifting floes, finding narrow leads of open water. The sounds of the ship's hull grinding against the ice became the constant soundtrack of their lives. At times, the ice would close in, trapping them for hours, trapping them for days. The men worked tirelessly, using ice saws and picks to break a channel for the ship. But the further south they pushed, the denser and more formidable the ice became. On January 19, 1915, their progress came to a final, shuddering halt. The Endurance became beset, frozen fast in a vast, solid ice floe only a day's sail from her intended landing site. At first, the men were not overly concerned. They settled into a routine, turning the ship into a winter station. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The ship and its crew drifted helplessly with the ice pack, carried further and further away from their destination. With the Endurance trapped and slowly being destroyed, the 28 men were cast into a terrifyingly precarious situation. They were now marooned on a floating raft of ice in the middle of the Weddell Sea, one of the most remote and inaccessible places on Earth. The temperature regularly plummeted to -20 degrees Celsius and below, a cold so intense it felt like a physical blow. The wind was a constant torment, whipping snow and ice crystals that stung any exposed skin. Their world was reduced to a vast, monotonous expanse of white, a landscape that offered no shelter, no landmarks, no sign of life beyond their own small party. The psychological toll of their isolation was immense. They were utterly alone, more than 1,000 miles from the nearest human settlement. The endless polar night of the winter months played tricks on their minds. Days blurred together in a cycle of twilight and impenetrable darkness. The constant grinding sound of the ice pressing against their doomed ship was a nerve-wracking reminder of their vulnerability. They had no radio to call for help. No one in the outside world even knew of their plight. Hunger became a looming threat. Their initial supplies were plentiful, but they were finite. As the months wore on, rations had to be carefully managed. The men supplemented their diet by hunting the local wildlife, seals, penguins. The blubber was not just for food, it was their primary fuel, used for cooking and melting snow for drinking water. The ice itself was their greatest and most unpredictable enemy. The floe on which they lived was not a solid, stable platform. Cracks could suddenly appear without warning, splitting their camp in two. Massive pressure ridges would form as floes collided. Every day was a gamble, living with the constant fear that their icy refuge could break apart at any moment, plunging them into the frigid, deadly waters of the Weddell Sea. On October 27, 1915, the inevitable happened. The pressure from the ice just became too great. With a series of shrieks and groans, the hull of the Endurance was breached beyond repair. Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. The men salvaged what they could: 3 lifeboats, sledges, tents, food, essential equipment. They established a new home on the solid sea ice and named it Patience Camp. Patience and fortitude became their most essential supplies. Their last link to civilization sank beneath the ice a month later. Life at Patience Camp turned into a monotonous, grueling routine and a daily struggle against despair. Shackleton knew morale was as crucial as food. He insisted on a strict schedule. Mealtimes were punctual. Daily chores were assigned to everyone. In the evenings, he encouraged singing, games, storytelling. Frank Hurley saved his glass plate negatives. Those images became a powerful record. These routines gave a sense of normalcy and purpose, preventing a psychological collapse. Leadership was the bedrock of survival. Shackleton was a master at managing men. He was constantly watchful, moving from tent to tent, sharing a joke, offering a word of encouragement, quelling signs of dissent. Small grievances could erupt into dangerous conflicts. He distributed desirable food, like sugar, with absolute fairness. Frank Wild was Shackleton's stoic second-in-command, a pillar of strength who commanded respect. Their leadership held the fragile community together. As summer of 1916 approached, the ice floe began to break up. Shackleton knew they couldn't stay on the ice indefinitely. He decided to take to the 3 small lifeboats they had salvaged. After a harrowing 5-day journey through the ice-choked sea, the 28 exhausted men finally reached land. It was Elephant Island, a desolate, ice-covered rock on the very edge of the Antarctic peninsula. It was solid ground, but it was far from salvation. The island was remote, inhospitable, well outside any normal shipping lanes. There was no chance of a passing ship spotting them. Shackleton knew that staying there meant a slow death from starvation and exposure. A more desperate plan was needed. He decided to undertake one of the most audacious voyages in maritime history, to sail one of the small lifeboats across the stormiest ocean in the world to South Georgia. The chosen vessel was the James Caird, the largest of the 3 lifeboats, measuring just 22.5 feet long. The expedition's carpenter, Harry McNish, worked miracles to prepare the boat for the journey. He raised the sides to provide more protection from the waves, built a makeshift deck from packing cases and canvas, and sealed the seams with seal blood and oil paint. Shackleton selected 5 men to accompany him: Frank Worsley, Tom Crean, Harry McNish, John Vincent, Timothy McCarthy. The remaining 22 men under the command of Frank Wild were left behind on Elephant Island to await a rescue that might never come. On April 24, 1916, the James Caird set sail into the infamous Drake Passage. They were heading for the whaling stations of South Georgia, 800 miles away. For 17 days, the 6 men endured unimaginable conditions. They were crammed into the tiny boat, constantly soaked by freezing spray and monstrous waves. Ice coated the boat and their clothing, adding dangerous weight and threatening to capsize them. They had to crawl out onto the icy deck to chip it away. Worsley, the navigator, had the most critical job. He had to take sightings of the sun with his sextant, a nearly impossible task on the violently pitching boat, with only 4 brief glimpses of the sun during the entire voyage. Their journey was a relentless battle against the elements. Yet through sheer grit and Worsley's miraculous navigation, they sighted land. On May 10th, they landed on the uninhabited southern coast of South Georgia. While Shackleton and his small crew battled the Southern Ocean, the 22 men left behind on Elephant Island clung to a precarious existence. They were under the command of Frank Wild, whose calm and steady leadership was the glue that held them together. Their landing spot, which they called Cape Valentine, was a narrow, exposed beach constantly pounded by waves. so they sought a more sheltered location. They found a slightly more protected spit of land 7 miles away, which they named Point Wild. Here they fashioned a makeshift hut by turning over the 2 remaining lifeboats and using stones and canvas to create walls. This cramped, dark shelter would be their home for over 4 months. Life in the hut was bleak and miserable. It was a space no larger than a small room where 22 men lived in near total darkness, their clothes and sleeping bags perpetually damp and frozen. The blubber stove, their only source of heat and cooked food, filled the space with greasy, choking smoke. Their diet consisted almost exclusively of seal and penguin meat. The relentless Antarctic weather battered their flimsy shelter. Blizzards would rage for days on end, trapping them inside, while the constant roar of the wind and crashing waves was a backdrop to their existence. Frank Wild, much like Shackleton, understood the critical importance of morale. He maintained a strict routine and a positive outlook, despite the overwhelming odds against them. He would rouse the men each morning with a cheerful call of, "Lash up and stow, boys. The boss may be coming today." He organized hunting parties and ensured that the dwindling food supplies were rationed with scrupulous fairness. However, as the weeks stretched into months, the physical and mental strain began to show. Men suffered from frostbite, illness, and the crushing weight of despair. One man had a heart attack, and another had his frostbitten toes amputated with rudimentary tools. Every morning the men would scan the northern horizon, searching for the silhouette of a ship. Each day that passed without a sign chipped away at their hope. They had no idea if Shackleton had even survived the journey in the James Caird. They held on day after agonizing day, fueled by a flicker of hope that their leader, the boss, would keep his promise and return for them. Shackleton, Worsley and Crean, having landed on South Georgia, were in a desperate state. They were exhausted, weak, and on the wrong side of the island. To reach the Stromness whaling station, they had to cross the island interior, unmapped mountains and glaciers. Leaving 3 men too weak to continue in McNish's care on the coast, the trio set off on a final desperate trek. For 36 continuous hours without sleeping bags or a tent, they climbed treacherous ice falls, navigated crevasse-filled glaciers, and slid down snowy slopes in the darkness. Using only a carpenter's adze as an ice axe and a length of rope, they pushed themselves beyond all known limits. At one point, lost in fog and facing a sheer drop, they decided to slide down a steep snow slope into the unknown, a gamble that could have ended in their deaths. Finally, on the morning of May 20th, 1916, they heard a sound they had not heard in almost 2 years. The steam whistle of the whaling station signaling the start of the workday. They had made it. Their appearance at the Stromness station caused astonishment and disbelief. Filthy, with long matted hair and beards, and clothes worn to rags, they were barely recognizable as human. Once their identity was confirmed, a boat was immediately sent to pick up the 3 men left on the other side of the island. But Shackleton's relief was overshadowed by a single burning thought: the 22 men still stranded on Elephant Island. Rescuing the men on Elephant Island proved to be an epic struggle in itself. The Antarctic winter had now set in, and a formidable barrier of pack ice surrounded the island. Shackleton made 3 separate attempts to reach them, but each time the impenetrable ice forced him to turn back. Finally, he secured the use of a small but sturdy Chilean steam tug, the Yelcho. On his 4th attempt on August 30th, 1916, he found a narrow channel of open water. As they neared the shore, they saw a figure. Shackleton yelled, "Are you all well?" The reply came back across the water, "All well!" Not a single man had been lost. The rescue of the men from Elephant Island marked the end of a 22-month ordeal. Against all odds, every single member of the Endurance crew had survived. When they returned to a world engulfed in the Great War, their story was initially overshadowed. Over time, though, the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition became one of history's most celebrated survival stories. Not a tale of failure to cross a continent, but a monumental triumph of leadership and the human will to live. Above all, the story is a study in leadership. Shackleton's unwavering optimism, his meticulous attention to his crew's well-being, his absolute refusal to give up. The lessons are timeless. It teaches the power of hope in the face of despair. It shows the importance of teamwork, ingenuity. Today, Shackleton's story inspires people from all walks of life. Business leaders, astronauts, with courage, resilience, unwavering leadership. The human spirit can endure almost anything. Shackleton didn't cross Antarctica, but he conquered the limits of human endurance. He left a legacy that echoes through the ages,